Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit City Think and Drink. I am Jim Gall. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the host of this here event. Now in definitely in the end of our seventh year, going into our eighth in this fall. So we're having a great time. For those of you who don't know, so we do this the second Tuesday of every month, but we take a break now that we're in this space in the summer because this space, as you can tell, is not AC, and therefore it is sweltering back here, especially if they happen to be brewing at the same time. So we have a talk in June, and then we take a break until October. So hopefully you'll come in June. Cheryl Greengrover giving a talk, and there's a bit of an honorary party going on as well during that event. So we hope we'll show up and see some old embarrassing photos of Cheryl that we have definitely dredged up for that event. So some good stuff. So for those of you who are new to it, I'll introduce our speaker. She'll give you an amazing talk. We'll give her a short break, and then we'll give away prizes for those of you who haven't gotten come on in. Grab any space you find. Then she'll take a short break. We'll make sure everybody has a raffle ticket. We give away some swag, and then we'll do a question and answer, and you can play Stump the Speaker at that point. Okay, sound good? All right. Also, before I forget, I always forget. I should mention the sponsors. So, the Office of Community Partnerships and my boss, School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, they help sponsor this by paying for the swag. That's pretty much it. And the advertising. If you want to get notices in the email about the events, you can scan the QR code, and we only send that out. I don't do anything else with that listserv. So if you want to get yourself on the listserv, you can do that. You can also Google Tacoma Grit City Think and Drink, and you can get to the website, and you can, see what's coming up there. You can also see past talks if I didn't screw up the recording, because I am everything, including the AV boy, and I was not trained properly. So make sure you check that out. If you want to see some previous talks or you want to share it with friends, you can share those in. It usually takes us a couple days to get it up there on our YouTube channel, so you can check out the previous talks. Sound good? All right. Without further ado, I will turn on our speakers. I'll put them up, and then you can turn them on here in a second. So, our speaker tonight, Dr. Ellen Moore, who is also a good friend of mine, is a professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma, where she studies how media tells and sells stories about the environment. Her previous book, Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline, The Framing of Injustice, examined media coverage of the pipeline protests in partnership with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Her current book explores what happens when people's direct experience of climate disasters doesn't match the stories they're told. She recently returned from fieldwork in Maui and I don't know how many other places. She lives in Tacoma with her husband and far too many, if possible, rescued pets, and some that aren't rescued, they are just permanent at this point. So without further ado, Ellen.
Thank you, Jim. So folks, if you let me know, can you hear me okay? Is it too loud? Is it loud? Okay, it's fine. All right, wonderful. Yeah, so I'll be telling you a little bit about the work that I have been doing. Maui was one of the sites, but I've been all over the world to do my research. And so I'm wrapping that up this summer. Better, okay. So this will be the only image that you see of the fire. And that is a choice that I've made. This actually came from Maui News, so it was a local source. But I'll tell you why that is the case. But this is about the fire that hit Lahaina, Maui in 2023 and the interviews that I did there. So who am I? I feel like Jim already gave you the introduction, so I can just go through this quickly. But I teach media studies, communication at the UW Tacoma. And yes, I do have too many rescued animals. And this is Molly, who decides that we have too many dogs. I know that. And this is actually the foster mama and her kittens that we have this week. All right. I wanted to say a very, very big thank you to Na Aikani o Maui Cultural Center of Lahaina. The money from this tonight that I just found out about will actually go to that center after this. And also Manai Kalani Media, I wanted to thank them as well. They really sprouted up in the aftermath of the fire to represent the community. And so I talked with them as well. And then finally, I want to thank Dr. Danica. Oh, yeah, it's long. Dr. Danica Miller. And I wanted to say thank you so much for always being willing to read what I have written, provide feedback, and I really appreciate it. All right, so a little bit of the background. So this is contracted with the University of Michigan Press. I chose them because my last two books, I had done it with traditional, I think publishers like Routledge and Palgrave, and the books were so expensive that nobody could buy them, and I didn't see that happening. And University of Michigan said that they would make it open access, and so that's the reason why I chose them. The working title is Double Exposure, Climate Change, and the Stories the Media Sells and Tells. But of course, that's changed because the book has changed as I've gone around the world. So the central question that has guided this research is, does direct exposure to a changing climate, you experience a heat dome, there's a climate-fueled fire, something like that. Does that change our perspective on life? Does it change the media that we engage with? So does it change our frames of reference? So double exposure is what I'm calling it, change in a warming world. So the method, I did interviews in Lahaina, also in Australia. I've talked with older white male farmers in Georgia and also in Washington State. And then this summer, I'm going to California to talk with some folks who lost their home to the Palisades fire last year, if you recall, and also talk with some youngins here in Tacoma. So that's going to cap off the research. I did just want to share with you what the research was like in Australia, because how many of you, has anybody ever been there? A few? If you know and you've been driving around, then you encounter all kinds of interesting creatures. And I thought I would share with you one that I saw that's camouflaged against the tree. And it's a lace monitor lizard that was longer than my car. And so that was the kind of interesting stuff. So the field research has taken me all around, and here I am back in Tacoma centered. So let us turn to the fire, and I'll keep myself honest with the timer. There we go. So I know I have some notes up here, but do folks typically know what caused the fire, the direct cause? Did you ever follow the fire? Yeah. I will tell you all about it, but on August 8th, 2023, it was the deadliest US fire in a little more than a century. The lives lost were about 102, 103, except that number is really hard to estimate because some people are still missing. Some people moved away, and so even that number is difficult to come by. So the causes are very tiered, and what I mean by that is there was an energized power line from the Hawaiian Electric Company, and it fell over. It was very dry. It fell over, and a blaze started. The fire folks went up there, and they thought they put it out, but a spark, they think now, had jumped, and it jumped into a nearby gully. They left, and then when it turned into a fire in the early morning that just raced down the hill, and I'll show you that. So that is the direct cause. The secondary, though, the environmental factors, was that there was a severe drought. And actually, when I did my interviews in November, they were also in a severe drought. And I'm going to tell you why that's actually a human-caused drought. So I will tell you that. Climate change exacerbates it, but it's also human-caused. But there was also Hurricane Dora to the south of the island, and that was pushing up against the island. And then there was actually a high-pressure system to the north. And if you can think of it like there was a squeeze and a push of wind that created 60 to 90 mile per hour winds that morning. So it did create this perfect storm. But the broader context for the fire was centuries of settler colonial oppression, and we'll talk about that. Let me show you. So I took this on the night of a supermoon, actually, so it made it a little bit easy to see. This is not the exact site of the fire. It's just right next to it. I'm just not showing it. But this is actually right next to a middle school, and the middle school was fine because the flames went downhill. I'll show you. So this is what it looks like. If you look at do I have a pointer on this thing? Yeah. So this is where it started, which is right up here. And then it quickly fanned out. And it was almost like tumbling air. You kind of think of it that way. It jumbled, tumbled, and then it jumped to houses. And like I said, this created a perfect storm for the fire to move very quickly. And so it's important to know where Lahaina was, to know where it is now in terms of its fire danger, its proclivity to fire, and things like that. And so, just in a brief history, Lahaina, pre-colonization Maui, it really was a system that was marked by health and balance. And I get all of this history from Honani K. Trask and Noinoi Silva. And so the Kanaka Maoli, which just for them means original human and just human, they had a system called the Ahupua'a system. And if you can see, it's not as clear, but if you can see, these are the mountaintops here and here. And so they actually had a system where there were tracts of land. That was the Ahupua'a. And you had different family members, Ohana, who would actually take care of that. And it was basically called mana to makai, which means it's the mountain to the sea, and you were responsible for that whole system. And water was free flowing. It was really carefully managed, and it was abundant. There was a sailor who came by. I think it was part of the Cook expedition. A sailor called it the Venice of the Pacific because it had all these canals, and it was this beautiful, all these crops. It was really lovely. And the Venice of the Pacific name stuck for Lahaina. So water was seen as life, but it was also wealth. The word for water in the Hawaiian language, and by the way, I get all of this from the University of Hawaii Hilo. They have the Wehe Wehe dictionary. I don't speak Hawaiian, but when it's important to know, I checked with them because they are the source for that. The word for water is wai or vai. You can say it either way. But when you put it together, it means wealth. And they said water is wealth, right? Water is life, but water is also wealth. So let's remember this name, and I'll bring it back up in a moment. So the land was always prone to fire, but less so when it was managed by the native Hawaiians because the soil was moist. All the canals were going through. If a fire broke out, it just didn't spread because they kept the land so wet, and that was wonderful. With settler colonialism, especially with the Great Mahele in 1848, which basically privatized the land for the missionaries and the sugar barons who came after, it drastically shifted that land use. So it went from export crops so that you had native Hawaiians making food that they weren't eating, that were being exported and their labor used. And then it went from that to just a monocrop of sugar. Even when I was a kid, I remember getting like Maui sugar, and of course that has stopped. That land is now largely used for tourism. But each one of those industries, I call them the thirsty industries, because they use so much water and so many resources. And so they're really resource hungry industries, and it fundamentally changed that. Lahaina actually took on a new name, which meant cruel sun, because it was so dry. And the land is now more prone to fire than it was before. So settler colonialism changed all of that. So settler colonialism, defined just briefly, is, I like Noongar author, she's a First Persons from Australia, Claire Coleman. And she says the purpose of settler colonialism is to replace the people who live on the land the colonizers desire, the want, with the settler population and its culture. She goes on to say that is to eliminate or render extinct the people and culture living on the land being colonized. The purpose of settler colonialism is genocide. Hawaiian scholar J. Kahaulani Kawanui actually says it more bluntly and says it's an ongoing process that continuously destroys to replace. And we can see that happening in Maui. And so because of that, the cause of the fire was anything but natural. So it doesn't simply alter, settler colonialism doesn't just alter the landscape in the short term. It's a long-lasting form of trauma that really involves resources, land, and people. So for Maui in particular, Hawaiian Islands, but Maui in particular, whaling because Lahaina was a whaling port when it was taken over by settler colonials, altered the ocean's natural carbon sink significantly. The sugar baron industry basically took away all the native plants and instead had dry grasses that were prone to fire. They diverted water from native farmlands, increased CO2 emissions, and modern tourism has exacerbated these conditions. And so when you add climate change to this, it becomes a perfect storm. And you get the destruction of Lahaina, the physical destruction of Lahaina, and the toll on the people as well. So as long as the settler colonial system continues, then the fire is not a black swan. And I think one of the most important things I learned while researching this was that fires happen all the time there. They're constantly getting push-pulls of wind, but they've been lucky enough that it has been accompanied by rain or they've put them out. And but fires happen in a dry land. And so the second one is this perfect storm is in real danger of happening again, as long as this system is in place. So, but there is some good news, and I will share that with you at the end as well. So flying into Maui. So my experience as a white tourist and researcher. So I flew in November. They were in the middle of a stage 2 drought, if I remember. When I was at the airport, I heard over the intercom, residents and visitors, please understand that we're in drought conditions. Please conserve your water. And I thought, oh, okay, so it's for everyone. We're all being asked to conserve water. But then I stayed in 2 places. I stayed in an Airbnb and a hotel. No signs, nothing. You could take a 2-hour shower if you wanted to. There were no restrictions at all for my perspective as a tourist, right? None whatsoever. But the people who live in Lahaina and live in Maui, they have restrictions all the time, but tourists do not. So there's still there's that power imbalance. This was a drought that you could really feel. I actually worked with Maui Cultural Lands Ohana. Has anybody ever been to Maui? I figured that there would be some. If you go to Maui again, please consider some time with the Ohana Cultural Land Trust. They take you up in an old pickup truck into these old lands where they actually had the native Hawaiian terraces coming down, and you pull weeds, you restore plants, you do things like that. While I was doing that, the native trees were all dropping their leaves because they were trying to conserve, just waiting for the rain. My skin just felt super dry. Everything felt dry. You could just feel it. And I don't know if you've ever pulled weeds, but we know that weeds like to stay in the ground. And trying to pull a dandelion out has been one of my biggest challenges. These weeds just came out like nothing. They were already dead. So even the weeds, even the invasive plants were dying because there was no water. And when I left, the day that I left, it was raining. So they were waiting for that rain. And you could feel that waiting. So I began to think of this kind of paradox of water in Maui. And it made me think of the Robert Coleridge poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. If anybody, for some reason, I don't know why, I memorized that poem when I was in college. I truly don't know what got into me. But I did remember this one section from the poem. It said, water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. And so I thought about that constantly because I thought there is water on Maui, and I will tell you. So there's the beautiful Pacific Ocean everywhere. You'll be driving and suddenly it will just come into view. It's kind of like the mountain. All of a sudden you drive, and there it is. There were green mountaintops and then dry foothills. So I'll show you a picture, and I'm sorry that it's going to be small, but you will actually see the brown hills, and then you'll see a line, and then you'll see green above it. And what that means is the water's not making it down to the people. It's making it to the corporations, but not the people. And so that's because they put colonial water catchment systems in the mountains to catch that water so that it can't just flow naturally down the sides of the mountain. But what you do see are golf courses everywhere, swimming pools, and flamingo ponds. So I don't know how the flamingos feel. Oh, they also have penguin ponds. That's a whole thing. Just try to avoid that if you ever go there. But what I saw was really evident in street signs. So now we know that the Hawaiian word for water is yes. And I saw that everywhere, but I saw it especially at the wealthy resorts. And so I came across this road when I was getting my coffee one morning, and it's called Wailea Ike. And so Wailea, so Y means water. Leia actually was the goddess of canoe building, very much related to water. So it's basically the waters of Leia, but Ike was what really made me think. And I don't know if anybody speaks Hawaiian here, but I looked it up using the University of Hawaii dictionary. It means awareness of. And I thought it was so interesting that this resort, so let me show you the photo. So I'm sorry that it's small, but can you see the golf cart there and the golf course and the sprinklers just going mad, over that? It's really interesting. And I was standing at Wailea Ike Road right here taking this photo. And what struck me, you can actually see the road to Lahaina in the background. So I don't know if you can tell, but this is all brown. And then what the palm trees are hiding is green. But this is all brown, and that's the road to Lahaina. And what it struck me was that there wasn't a lot of tourist awareness of the waters as they visit and as they use it. They're not aware of the drought, right, that the locals and Native Hawaiians face. And when I went to go volunteer my time, there actually was another fire. It didn't make the news, not really, but it was a few miles down from Lahaina. And once again, this all burned because there was no water. But you see what's in the background? Green fountains, trees, and resorts in the background. So dry destruction here, and I really thought that juxtaposition was interesting and helpful. So Lahaina now. So I did drive through Lahaina, and I drove through about 2 years after the fire. I took no pictures of the town. I will share no pictures of the town. I talked with my interview participants, my interviewees about this. They don't want pictures of the town. They don't want pictures of the town out there. And they actually, one of the people I talked with, she said, show nice pictures. Like we want to be reminded of happiness, but also this is a place where people died. So don't show these pictures. And I said, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So, but it was a study, but I can tell you a little bit about what I saw. There are 1,400 residential lots that have been cleared. Some are rebuilding and some aren't. And so it gives a really it's like a patchwork. There'll be some houses, some new construction, and then just empty lands. And I can tell you why. A lot of the land in Maui and those houses were handed down from generations. So these were folks who had been here, sometimes came to Maui or had always been in Maui, but these lands had been handed down. What it meant after the fire was that folks still had the land, but they didn't have the money to pay for the really expensive construction on Maui. They didn't have the money to pay for that. And that's the reason why the developers came in, and sometimes the developers came in 24 to 48 hours after the fire when there was still smoke, and trying to get people to sell. And the good news about Lahaina is that they have largely resisted that. And like I said, I will share some good news with you at the end, but the pressure was there. The money was there. The pressure was there. And so you would see burned palm trees. Not much can kill a palm tree, but fire can, and rusted sugarcane structures. But there were also signs for Lahaina Strong everywhere. Lahaina Strong, we are Lahaina Strong. They were everywhere because the community is coming together in really, really powerful ways. So my method was ethnographic interviews. I won't tell too much about it, except that you sit with the person. You usually try to do it in person. How they say it is just important as what they say. So you watch for that as well. And my approach, there wasn't a lot of trust in Lahaina, especially for somebody who's an outsider like myself, and I understood that. But because I knew people in Lahaina who trusted me, they made the introductions, and then I snowballed. So I would talk with one person, then they would say, okay, talk to my cousin, talk to somebody over here. And so it would snowball. And so that's how I met people. I met them where they were most comfortable. If they wanted to meet in a noisy cafe, we met in a noisy cafe. If they wanted to meet in a quiet place, we met there too. The challenges for all sites, I think for this whole research, is that these are people who have been through all types of traumatic events, fires, hurricanes, heat events, and then centuries of colonization. And so because of that, the goal is not to reintroduce trauma. I asked no questions about their experience of the fire. One, it's not relevant to the research, but also I didn't want them to have to relive it for me. But actually, most of them did talk to me about it. And so I will share, because they said they wanted their story shared, I will share that. I created an interview protocol and I did trainings when and where available. So the Lahaina participants. So there's Lani, who is 28 years old. She identifies as a Kanaka Maoli Wahine, a woman born and raised on the island of Maui in the Moku, which is the district of Lahaina. She's continuing her parents' legacy of activism with her Lahui, her nation, and community who she serves today. She is still on her pursuit to become a cultural anthropologist. She's such a bookworm. She has her own library at home, and she is a book lover. So she is wants to become a cultural anthropologist and earn her Hawaiian studies degree. The day of the fire, she thought she actually had COVID. And so she thought, I'm sick and I want to make sure it's nothing serious. I better go see the doctor. And her doctor was outside of Lahaina town. She took her little cousin, who was not old enough to drive. She took him with her and she said, oh, just come with me. I'm going to go to the doctor. Just come with me. So he didn't go to school that day. No, there was no school that day. He would have been home without a car. So she feels very grateful that she took him with her to her doctor's appointment. By the time she tried to come back, then the fire had already spread. Then there was John, 50s. He is a veteran. He describes himself as concerned, protective, community-oriented Hawaii rights advocate and volunteer. He's a musician. He works with Planet Maui. You can find their music on Spotify, et cetera. And he works with other local artists. He describes himself as a family man. He raised 2 children in Lahaina, and I think one still lives in Lahaina. And he supports those struggling with drug addiction through his volunteer work. So he was sitting in his car in the dawn hours that morning of August 8th, and he was just having a cigarette, and he looked up and he said, these winds, this feels strange to me. I think I'm just going to go away for the day. Like that was his feel. But he actually put a note out on social media first and just told everybody, this feels strange. I feel these winds. I don't trust it. I think I see smoke. Hey, folks. And he sent the message out. I think it was on Facebook. And then he left for the day. He did lose his home, and his adult son lost his boat, but they all survived. And then DeAndre, he's a media producer and co-founder of Manai Kalani Media. He was born and raised in Lahaina. All of his family is from there. And he identifies as, on social media, as Ka Ahanui from Lahaina. His home and his family homes were destroyed in the fire, and many of his family members are still displaced. So talking with them, these are the themes that emerged from their words. So one, there was no trust in mainstream media and how it covered the fire at all. So DeAndre said, I take mainstream media with a grain of salt. I just don't trust it at all, at the national level, or globally even. And Lani said, well, Lani gave a story. She said that there was a major New York newspaper. She said she couldn't remember which one, in Lahaina right after the fire. And she said, well, I'm going to do you a favor, big newspaper. I'm going to tell you the story of how the corporations and the government didn't bring us any water when we needed it fighting the fire. And so she talked to the newspaper, and she noticed, and she looked for the story. She looked for her interview for weeks. They never published her story, but they did quote this developer who said that the fire was the will of God. So they didn't quote her, but they quoted him. And then the whole community she said, were shocked and angered at this. And so that even furthered her mistrust of mainstream media. And finally, John gave an example of CNN as the problem. So a few months after the fire, Biden decided that he was going to visit. And when presidents visit, what they do? They clear things out. They do all this. And let me put John's quote. When Biden came, they closed off all the roads, and he said it re-traumatized people there because during the fire, the roads were closed and people couldn't get back in. They couldn't check on their homes. They couldn't check on their families. And so he said it actually re-traumatized people just for a photo op. So across the board, the participants did not trust mainstream media at all through stories. I wonder if I get rid of that. Okay. The second theme was trusted sources. So if they didn't trust mainstream media, who did they trust? They trust local and community media. And actually, many of them are doing local and community media themselves. So Lani, she prefers, as I mentioned, books and community-based media. She avoids outlets like New York Times or CNN. And she said, we get information from our local community organizations. We do our own research. She said, I don't mind using Google. So we'll go ahead, but I don't like using Google. So we'll go and find the books. It brings me joy to do that research. Like I said, she's a bookworm. So DeAndre said, I trust our local networks. I know our reporters. I've engaged with them, even filmed side by side with some of them at different events. So to an extent, I can trust them because I know them. He gave an example. He gave an example of HHH News online source. And ever since he said that and I started looking into it, all of my TikTok feed is HHH News, which is how I found out about the seal. If anybody, I thought I might get some nods. I just watched their piece today on the seal. And actually it was a tourist from Washington State who did the thing. And so John actually prefers independent creators, but he also will really read anybody as a way to feel informed, is what he told me. And so he prefers individual creators, podcasts over big media outlets. Oh, and by the way, so these are just all my photos, just from what Lonnie had asked. And so actually, I didn't want this book to be about artificial intelligence. I don't know how you all are feeling about it, but as a professor, I'm tired, and I understand its environmental impact, and but I can't not talk about it because AI is now everywhere. It's in our journalism. It's on news sites. It's in our classrooms. It's everywhere. So I kind of had to ask about AI. So I did ask about AI. And what I found was this. All of them had strict boundaries around their use of it, or they didn't use it at all. So Lonnie, so when I asked about it, she smiled and she shook her head. Now keep in mind, she's 28, right? So she's in the younger, she's younger generation. And she said, well, Chat GPT, all of those, they're cool. I'll use them sometimes. If I want to make a pretty picture, I'll use Midjourney. But you ain't never going to catch me doing that for anything related to Lahaina and her community. I'll grab a book. And John said maybe it was AI that generated false theories that we were hearing after the fire. The best source of information was from boots on the ground and real video footage from friends. The facts were pretty much what we saw with our own eyes. And finally, DeAndre, he told me that he actually does use AI sometimes, but only for certain things. And he said, it's one of the most incredible things we've ever had access to, and one of the most detrimental. I don't like how it almost seems like a hive mind takeover is happening. Everyone's social media being written by AI feels like individual thought is being destroyed and being replaced by a single human, non-human voice. And the environmental impacts make it hard to justify its use. I would not use it for research purposes about Lahaina or Maui, he said. Theme 4 was social media. And so how did they feel about social media? John said he appreciates its power to inform him, but also to mobilize. So those two things. He said, as soon as we got Starlink, I don't know if you followed it, but in the period right after the fire in Lahaina, there was no communication. You heard stories about people going out into the water just to try to get signal from a nearby island. But there was John told me that there was a truck that came in that had Starlink, and they just kept that truck going 24/7, and people would be using that. And so he said, as soon as we got Starlink on that truck, we need healers, light workers, herbalists, and boom, just like that, they showed up. Lonnie, she said she was grateful for social media to communicate with family and share the story of the fire with those outside of Lahaina. So she said, our power was out. So I got to communicate with people, everyone checking in, saying, you okay? And uploading videos. And people wanted to know what was going on. I used TikTok. Instagram was cool. Just putting up a post and getting it out to say, I'm okay. DeAndre gets most of his news from social media. And he basically said that he appreciates how they help to amplify, because there's such huge accounts with massive followings. They can help to amplify other people's messages. So that's how we're able to spread news as well as at a community level. I can reach so many different audiences that I never could before. But all of them recognize social media as a double-edged sword. And so, I mean, you will see some overlap here, but DeAndre saw two problems and one solution. One of the problems was after the fire, it wasn't just developers and real estate moguls coming in trying to take over. It was also what he called disaster influencers, which I'm sorry that I now, I guess, know that term and know that people do that. But he talked about disaster influencers coming in who weren't telling the truth about what was actually happening there. And he said, they don't tell our truth. It's not true to what we feel and what we are experiencing. The second problem was shadow banning. Do folks know what shadow banning is in general? It's when a post does get posted, like TikTok will allow you to post your video, but then they make it so that nobody really sees it. So technically it's not censorship, but nobody sees it. So that's the shadow banning part. And so he saw a real problem with shadow banning. And he said any anti-government posts would be censored. But for some reason, all of the green laser beam fucking conspiracy theories weren't being censored. I don't know if anybody heard, but they said that green laser beams were coming from the sky. And, so we found that so many people in America didn't understand that we were fighting for ourselves. The solution for him, he said, was we started picking up our cameras and taking over that narrative. For John, he also saw conspiracy theories and misinformation. And he said a lot of people, he called them storm chasers. So everybody had a different name for them. They wanted to talk about conspiracy theories and start pointing fingers in different directions, taking away our focus from what our task should be. We need to get our people fed. Let's not focus our energy on things that distract us. I went on my social media and said, I'm not here to talk about conspiracies right now. We need help. And then Lonnie also talked about shadow banning of local stories by the algorithm. You type in Lahaina fires and all social media, they were all taken down. TikTok did that for a long time. Instead, the algorithm pushed forward conspiracy theories like the green light and the green laser. So we're rounding the corner now. And so theme 5, the shifts. Did media use change after the fire? I was really curious. Did they have a value shift after the fire? Did they change their media use after the fire? And the answer was yes and no. The short answer was yes and. Lonnie said before, social media was entertainment for me. The news is depressing, so she mostly avoided it. But now she says, I think I may be a little bit more aware, a little bit more conscious of actually paying attention now, but it's damaging to do so. DeAndre said, before pre-fire, I was very unplugged. But now he says, post-fire, I'm probably unhealthily engaged because of my advocacy. John didn't talk as much about his before, but he did say that now he is hyper alert, and he said he wants a police scanner to get news as it happens. He has reported fires before local media knew about them, which he said was related to his community safety. So this is the story he told. out of the 5 or 6 fires since Lahaina, I would say I solved before they were even reported. We rely on Facebook or Instagram. One night, I reported a fire over the Pali that nobody saw because it was down below and it was a full moon and I saw black smoke that looked like a tornado. So I called dispatch and I told them. And by the time I got to Kahului, the fire trucks were there. Then I looked on the news and there the story was. I think this is our final theme. Did beliefs about climate change shift post-fire? And this is where I think for me, it really changed the way I was feeling about this. So the short answer was no. Their beliefs about climate change the fire did not change their beliefs about climate change and the climate crisis. And I'll tell you the reason why. DeAndre believes in climate change. He says, yeah, as a millennial, I definitely agree and believe in it. But climate change simply compounds existing problems related to settler colonialism, including the corporate control of Maui's fresh water. First, it was for sugar plantations, then luxury resorts. He talked about the McMansion infinity pools and hotel waterfalls. The fire is a result of an ecosystem in crisis. He said that, and this is his documentary. He did a documentary called Lahaina Rising. He says, Mana to Makai stream flow is extremely important, and not just here in Hawaii, but I'm certain everywhere in the world, because complete ecosystems develop around that water flow. To disrupt that is very detrimental to the environment. So it started with the diversion of the waters. And he summarized by saying, and I'm sorry that I'm reading this, but this is all it's really important. So please, over 130 to 150 years, on top of an introduction of invasive species, a depletion of native species, whether by out competition from the invasives or from extraction for capitalistic industries like sandalwood trade, that was what caused the fire. I mean, it was a defunct telephone pole that caused a spark, but it was 130 plus years of corporate capitalist extraction. And Lonnie also links colonization and corporate control of water to the fire. She noted that we're still in a stage 2 drought, or they were still in a stage 2 drought. But hotels and people with swimming pools are still allowed to have their water for hotel amenities. Did climate change cause the fire? She said, this is a very loaded question, for the climate crisis is part of the cause for the fires in Lahaina. And she says, we put land, water, and ocean first, because these are the things that will take care of us. The mentality of colonizers is to put money on land, water, and ocean. It's a bottomless resource until it gets depleted. We, as the Hawaiians, see potential to bring back our historical places and a lot of the resources that were hidden for years. Colonizers and corporations see this as a profit opportunity and genuinely don't care about where natives and local people go. They're willing to displace people that have gone through a major trauma. She talked also about the movie Pocahontas, and I will read what's in bold. To me, the underlying note is that we, as the natives, already had all the riches. We didn't need people to come and teach us what they think riches look like. And then when we were talking, she gestured over my shoulder kind of like this, and then she pointed because I was sitting with my back to the mountain behind me. And she said, they had us on water rationing, you know, like try not to wash your dishes or wash your laundry, conserve your water. And she said, la, la, la. This mountain behind us up here is the second wettest place on the planet. How does that happen? How is it so dry here? Her summary was, I know we're in a very different place today. I believe that if Hawaiians were to go back to our land tenure system, we would be a flourishing and thriving people. And so I promise you good news, and I will give you that good news. You probably don't want to hear too much about my theory building, but I will say this. I will say that my original theory that maybe going through a heat dome, going through a fire, going through some other climate-fueled catastrophe might change your view on things. But what the people in Lahaina taught me was it's more like continuous exposure. That is to say, the Kanaka Maoli I interviewed, they've always seen through settler colonial narratives, they've always critiqued systems of power. And so they've always understood the context behind climate change in a much more complex way. So because of these interviews, it changed my entire framework for the research. This is not the last fire. So as I've stated before, the leaders of Na Aikane o Maui Cultural Center of Lahaina, they're working to gain support to return the area to the lush garden that it used to be. And I really like this tree. This is the Ohia alahua tree. It's the first tree, I think, to emerge on lava flows in Hawaii. And it takes over seemingly barren rock. It finds nutrients, and then it shoots out these beautiful flowers that are used to pollinate. So the good news, just a couple of weeks ago, Maui residents are rebuilding Lahaina for locals, not tourists. In Hawaii, we take care of one another. So the vision is there, and it's actually starting to happen. And I think the momentum is there as well. So, and they're getting like major media coverage. So the momentum is there. So I want to say thank you, but I also want to say if you want to support and learn more, I put QR codes for Lahaina Strong, which is the primary community organization there. They will teach you more about the rebuilding efforts. All the information is there. You can also donate if you ever feel like it. And then Maui Cultural Lands Ohana is the best way to spend a day in Maui. There were great people, there was food, and there might have been wine midday, which was a delightful surprise after weeding all day. And I believe that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Just want to remind you that June 9th is our next talk, and that'll be the last one before we take our summer break. So I hope you come here and learn about harmful algae blooms actually in Puget Sound. That'll be the talk. And so without further ado, we'll bring up Ellen for a short question and answer session.
How do you do the microphone? Do people just yell? Okay, any questions?
Okay, so what does resistance against colonial narratives look like as far as reclamation of tourism and like the awareness of water kind of moving forward?
That's a great question. And I would say in terms of tourism, that's entrenched. That's a really, really entrenched system that goes back like the water catchment systems were put hundreds of years ago. And so that becomes difficult. I would say that right now, thinking about where Lahaina is, it is about recovery at this moment. And they've actually had some really wonderful developments. They advocated really hard for, I think, what was called Proposition 9, I think. And that was basically to take away some of the short-term housing in Maui and Lahaina and actually return it to local peoples. And so that was actually a huge thing that just happened, I think, in January. And so I think they're really focused on that. But the water issue is a very, very real issue. And but I haven't heard anything on that because I think that right now they're just trying to get their feet, if I had to guess, and focus on housing right now.
I was just wondering, because you originally went to look to see if people changed their opinion on climate change, like were the majority believers or like not, even if they didn't change.
You mean people around the world or that I've talked to in Hawaii or just all over? No, they all believed in climate change. But I mean, I think what I was trying to convey in terms of the complexity of their responses was, it was like, yeah, climate change, but you can't talk about climate change without talking about like the centuries of genocide oppression that we've had. And so therefore it was a really interesting type of question to ask because it was always, yes, but it's not that simple, I think was the answer. But yeah, they definitely believed in it. In fact, I had a really hard time just in my research in general, finding people who didn't believe in climate change. And I think that's very telling because we can all see it at this moment. Except for the farmers in Georgia, that was interesting. So they're the only ones I came across that don't.
All right, I'll walk up here. My question is going to be, how did framing impact the understanding of the people in the area? Framing, like the way that media frames all of the crisis.
Good question. Asked like one of my students, who does framing analysis. So the questions about framing, I will say this. I thought that I was actually going to do framing analysis by the media. And that's what I put in the proposal for my book. I said I was going to look at New York Times or whoever they were reading. But guess what? Nobody's reading the same thing. And HHH News, for example, the Maui News, that's done by multiple different sites and people. There's no way to do framing analysis anymore, which was my big revelation. Do you wish that I had it before you took a class with me? Because, yeah. And so media have become fragmented and nobody's really listening and watching the same thing anymore, which makes it interesting to consider framing. You can still have dominant narratives. And I do think that New York Times, big outlets, they're going to have a corporate framing on things. And I've seen that for a long time. So I think dominant narratives still survive. And I think the corporate framing is still there.
Did the native Hawaiians use technology?
As much, thank you, Christopher. As much as anyone. In fact, I mean, DeAndre uses all kinds of AI, social media, et cetera. So they're absolutely tied in, as the modern society that they are. So yeah, definitely tied in. And I would also say very knowledgeable about it, and very savvy about it. Their views on AI, they see it fairly clearly. DeAndre said to me, well, I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist when it comes to the media. And I said, I don't think you have to be a conspiracy theorist to believe that, that the coverage is not going to be great and that it's going to serve people in power. And he said, I know, I just like to say that, but I think the critique is there. Yeah.
Thanks. What you're saying about the distrust of the corporate media really resonates. I have a friend in Minneapolis, and during all the ICE stuff that was happening, he was imploring people to look at local community sources rather than getting their news from the New York Times. We forget about local community stuff because it's not maybe splashed over all of our medias. But what suggestions would you have for people in Tacoma wanting to know about our local scene? What kind of community sources do you trust?
Yeah. So Tom's question was, what community sources do you trust? And what's really interesting is that anybody who knows me well at this point, it might have happened after your class with me, but definitely not before yours, was TikTok. TikTok turns out to be, because everyone's on TikTok. Scientific American is on TikTok, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, all of these sites are on TikTok. And the algorithm, if you're watching those things, naturally sends you to local creators. And it's funny that you asked that, because just this week, I've had local creators on TikTok. All of a sudden, my feed is Tacoma. It finally figured out where I am, I guess. So I do find that these local historians are folks that I trust, and I'm learning to trust them, but it's taking a while, right? Yeah. But TikTok has less misinformation than anecdotally than Facebook does, than others, because they vet it pretty carefully. They label anything it's AI. And so it's a very anti-AI platform in general. But in terms of local sources, I really struggle with TNT because a couple of years ago with the methanol plant, I felt like their coverage was very corporate and they weren't really listening to the community. They weren't listening to what people were saying, and they were in favor of big business. And I think that really made me not know who to turn to locally. And then I found these local creators, and but it takes a while, because if you vet them and you care about the truth, it takes a while to know who to trust. So I don't know if I have an answer. I like Tacoma Weekly. I like the volcano, when I get to it. But overall, what I get online is very dynamic. And there's lots of good folks out there who are local, who are doing good research on the detention center and things like that. So really good research. I think that would be beyond, that's probably not my story to tell. The only thing I can say is that with the interviews, they constantly were reflecting on resilience. Honestly, the turn to community media and the turn to community, everything that you saw in all those quotes, community is strength, community is resilience. And if maybe that's a way to answer your question, it's community, definitely, 100% from their words. Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. Do make sure when you leave, if you wouldn't mind putting your glassware in the bin that's in the back and throw your trash, not the plastic trays, but the trash in the can. That would be awesome. It helps out the crew here, gives us space for free. So thank you all. Hope to see you in June. It's actually supposed to cool down quickly tonight. So enjoy the warmth, I guess, for a day, and then you're going to get back to normal May weather.